From the spooky stories to the stars above, it's time for the UFO report. Big news today from little Timmy Seanor.
Nobody's gonna know.
They're gonna know.
Tim, it's been a while, but it's glad to have you back on the air with me, my man. And thank you so much for helping out Marquise last week in my absence. And I know you're going to be helping him out on Thursday and Friday, which is going to be good. How you been doing, my man?
Oh, just great. Just great. Thanks for asking. I've been taking the side of the woo while you've been gone. It's given me a little chance to stretch my wings and talk some stuff that usually I wouldn't with you. I mean, I took some different angles with Marquise. It was a lot of fun.
Well, you are the woo master.
No.
You are a woo master, and we all need to appreciate the woo-ness that you bring each and every night to this show, my man. Each and every night.
Rockin'. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. And today was a very, very busy day. We're going to get into this very heavily over the next little bit here. But Dr. Stephen Greer, who I have never really been a fan of because of the way when I tried to send him an interview request, he wanted to know numbers. He wanted to know how much I was going to pay him. He wanted questions up front and center, which a real journalist never provides. Okay, he wanted a whole list of things, and I actually rescinded that interview request. Well, 20 years in the making, he held another disclosure conference in Washington, D.C. earlier today, and some people are loving it. Some people are ripping it. Some people don't know what to think. Tim, take it away.
Oh, okay. Well, Dave, in my opinion, I feel like we're in an age of disclosure right now. And we'll just call it that simply because it is the topic of parlance right now. And we know that David Grush is currently trending on Twitter. Disclosure is trending. Stephen Greer is trending. And so we should just enjoy this while we can. We've been waiting for so long for UFOs to be taken seriously, and finally it's making headlines. Now, we're only just getting to scratch the surface potentially with some of the new revelations that were made today by Stephen Greer and his group of whistleblowers and witnesses. But I think that there will be a fallout, and hopefully we'll hear that Congress listens. And now we know that Arrow and the people that are involved in that organization have been made aware of all of the information that has been presented both at this public hearing and also a confidential version that was made behind closed doors before the public presentation. So we know that, let's just go ahead and call it, in this age of disclosure, at some point we're going to get the government backed up against the wall to a point where they're going to have to talk about this openly and seriously. And perhaps we'll get some information about real craft, real reverse engineering, and maybe even the pilots. That would be real disclosure. Now, that is the topic of the night. It's pretty exciting. I have some details. Very little opinion at this point because really it's hard to digest so much information after 3 hours of a presentation, at least, made today. There's quite a lot to talk about. But Dave, I'm very much down the middle on this. I'm not somebody that historically has a lot of information on UFOs. So when I see it come like this to public, it's kind of a jaw-dropping moment. So for me, today was pretty massive.
Well, I mean, it's something different than we've heard. I mean, Stephen Greer definitely takes a different approach to disclosure than what we are seeing with uh, happening with the government. Greer has his own timeline of doing things. He has his own sources, and going back to what we saw a few years ago, there seems to be a real divide between Stephen Greer, his sources in government, and what we saw with Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and their sources in the government regarding this subject. Greer comes from, over 30 years of doing this and pressuring uh, members of the Congress and senators. So he has met with presidents, although that has never been confirmed. And the discussion that kind of went on today was a real mixed bag of aviation historians, like our good friend on this show, Jim Goodall, was mentioned, and everybody loves Jim Goodall for his knowledge.
Yeah.
Another good friend of this show, Michael Schratt, took part in this, and we got to get Michael back on the air here very soon, because
Yeah.
he is just so brilliant. But there were a number of insiders and alleged whistleblowers that he brought out that were their stories were extremely compelling. Apparently, these stories were sent to Arrow, and Dr. Greer had stated that he was shocked that Sean Kirkpatrick, the head of the Arrow program, really didn't even acknowledge that they were there. And this goes to show, Tim, a real divide, and we'll get into the experiencers here in a little bit, but it really goes to show that a big divide that is happening on the road to disclosure, because there are different roads. Which road wins or which one's the shortest, we don't know.
And it's interesting too because we know that they actually share a lot of similarities. Danny Sheehan has worked for both organizations, and some of the whistleblowers have spoken to both organizations. And I think that probably the chips land where they need to when it comes to something like this. So if this whistleblower maybe would be handled better with Lou's team, then that's the way that would be presented. And some whistleblowers would do better presenting through Stephen Greer and his work, and so be it. But I think that they're really maybe working towards two similar goals. I believe coming from two trains of thought, whereas I think Lou and his team are looking for aggressive disclosure with whistleblowers and perhaps looking into some of the um, allegations that can be supported through the work of Danny Sheehan in bringing some transparency forward via his work against the government directly. And then we have the work that Dr. Greer has done historically, which is pretty much pressing the buttons of the public and getting them to support and address some of the illegal potential programs that the government has been doing with reverse engineering and technology. And so, although they are two very similar uh, goals in disclosure, very different ways of going about it. So that's why I think you have these two very separate fields of push, of support, and things like that. But at the same rate, we're still looking at disclosure. And today, I think, was monumental for people that have had experiences. This was a big moment for experiencers, in my opinion, and people that have experienced perhaps being taken, in one way or another, whether they think it was by us or them. It's an experience. And so we heard some of that from military whistleblowers, and you can call them experiencers, really, at this point, bringing that forward very publicly. and respectfully. And I thought that that was great. You know, we heard solid um, statements from 4 whistleblowers today, which I felt was the most poignant part of Stephen's presentation today.
Let's get to the experiencers here. There were a number of experiencers who sat up, stood up, took to the podium, and really shed their heartfelt stories about what happened to them. Okay, we're talking everything from white plasma balls surrounding people's these people, their family members, to almost being killed by fellow American soldiers. There were a number of these strange incidences that came out to play, and for anybody who is listening in for the first time, they'd probably look at this, Tim, and say, this is odd. We don't do that. We don't play the game that way. This is so phony. But for these guys who stood up, and their reports have allegedly been part of the whistleblower program, and their reports and evidence has been sent to Arrow as well. These guys were, as far as we know, legit.
Yeah, absolutely. Consider retired Colonel Donald Heckert, U.S. Air Force. And he was talking about the glowing plasma balls that you're talking about in his experience and coming in close contact with that. And then we heard from Michael Herrera, sorry, U.S. Marine Corps of Indonesia from 2009. And hearing his story was intense, how they came up upon a spacecraft potentially being used to mobilize what he thought were illegal drugs at one point, and then thought maybe it was humans. And that story was massively impactful, and some of the takeaways from that were extremely impactful. And then we heard from Stephen Digna Jr., U.S. Army Raytheon from Fort Irwin, California, and he experienced a black diamond encounter in Barstow, California. And he not only experienced something that he believes was human, where he was taken and perhaps he's not sure taken, but by military personnel. Days later, he experienced a craft that was in fact what he believes was ET. And how he described the craft was that it was almost alive, and that he considered it to almost remind him of a cat, how it purred and reacted to him touching it, which I thought was really quite remarkable. And then we heard from DC Long from U.S. Army Fort Bragg in North Carolina, bringing us his story about a hovering granite slab at a deep underground facility at Fort Bragg back in 2010. And his description of that was incredibly impactful, that he walked through a large room with these large granite slabs, one carved perfectly into a massive rectangle, and then other raw pieces of granite. What he's describing is what looked like granite, just hovering feet off of the ground. And what is considered a remarkable story, Dave, when he came back to the room, he left the room and came back just a few minutes later, and those items, those granite slabs, were completely gone silently from that room. And finally, we heard from Eric Hecker, who was a Raytheon contractor at South Pole, describing what he's calling a neutrino light array in ice shafts. And as we know, that is a real technology that was used back in what we thought was the 80s and early 2000s, and then discontinued. But when he went up there, he said that is in full working order by some unknown energy source. And so these are all really interesting stories that bring to light the potential of ET technology blended with human technology, human sources, and military interaction. It's all very overwhelming, and there's quite a lot to unpack, but you get the idea that these things really happened, and these whistleblowers and witnesses that are coming forward are telling a real story. And so, Dave, what is your feeling when you kind of reflect on some of these impactful witness statements?
Well, I think it goes to show that, you know, and I didn't get to watch the entire thing. I have to be upfront with the audience. I do have two jobs, and at my daytime job, I was a little, you always get busy when you don't need to be busy, and you need to be doing other things. You know what I'm saying? And the idea behind this, Tim, is I really felt what these guys were saying. Okay. I listened to a couple of them and it hit me. As an experiencer, if I put that hat on for a minute, you can tell when something is hitting somebody. These people were emotional about this. This was very real to them. Now, none of us were there to experience it, but it happened while on watch for their jobs. And the one thing that I do recall Greer stating was that there is this technology out there that it's time that humanity starts taking control back. I think it's a little bit too utopic. We can get into that when we return from the break here in about 40 seconds, and maybe we should. But the idea behind these experiencers and what they went through, they really made you feel their trauma. They really made you feel, that there is something nefarious going on behind the scenes when it comes to this topic. Is it grandiose? Well, Stephen Greer has been called grandiose and a little bit off topic. He's not in favor of many ufologists out there because of the way he's done things. But these people made me believe today, Tim. They made me believe, and it didn't give me much hope. I can explain that when we return on Spaced Out Radio. The UFO report with our resident Timbit, Timmy Seanor. We're talking UFOs, Dr. Stephen Greer and his disclosure panel in Washington, D.C. earlier today. We're going to continue to dissect it when we return on Spaced Out Radio for the final half hour. Dude, you have no idea how exciting it is to be home and back on the air.
Yeah, it's very grounding to get rerouted with your fans, I'm sure. Get plugged back in.
It's been a good week. Been a good week, and to see everybody in the chat room and hanging on out, and I needed this.
That's great.
I needed this.
That's great. That's great. And that's what everyone is for. I mean, this show's as much here for you as you are for it feels like sometimes. And of course, there's been so much news. There's so much news. Unbelievable. And not even just with the whistleblower stuff. There's other stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
Vegas aliens? Dave.
I know.
Save me.
I know.
Hilarious.
Vegas aliens.
We missed them by how long? Or maybe they were there for us. They just got the dates mixed up.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to it, man. I'm looking forward to seeing where all of this goes.
Do you have any thoughts? Like, I mean, there's some pretty big stuff, and we know that there's going to get a lot of kickback from skeptics in the media. We don't have to talk about it now if you want to talk about it on the air, but let's hear the Dave skepticism. Come on, let's hear it.
I will just sit here and wait.
Right. Right. That's the Dave move.
I'll just sit here and wait. It's what I do best.
There's a game out that people can check out. It's getting horrible reviews, which is such a bummer because it could be so good. I think it's called Greyfield Incident. I'm pretty sure that's it. It's out on PC. It's about to come out on other platforms. But it's aliens, man, and they like land in a cornfield, and it's first person, kind of like aliens.
It's always aliens, dude. I don't know. I don't know what you're trying to pull here, man.
Well, this
Oh,
game, let's see. Yeah, no, did I get it wrong? Yes, Gray Hill.
Random Gee says to check your iMessage.
Oh, I will. Gray Hill Incident is the name of the game. Gray Hill Incident, and it's super creepy aliens game. Check it out. Uh-oh. I got sent a sound from RG. It's going to be rude, so I'm going to mute it. I'm sure it's going to be rude. Hold on. He's just trying to trick me into playing something on my mic. I'll bet you. He's a master manipulator. All right, I'm going to mute.
Yeah, he may have ripped one. Just so you know, he may have ripped one.
Okay, it's not what I thought. It's a bizarre alien sound. RG's got ETs.
He's got aliens, dude.
Yeah, that was a bizarre recording he just sent, but he swears during it. He gets all antsy and he swears a little, so we'll have to do that after show maybe or something.
Yeah, we'll send old random guy the link.
There you go.
All right, let's see if his Twitter's working today. At random Gee. No, you're gonna have to send him the link because he doesn't have his Twitter up and going.
I can do that. He just recorded this, I guess, at Vegas site.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Here we go, Tim. Okay, here we go. We rounded third. We're heading for home tonight on Spaced Out Radio. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for tuning us on in. I want to remind you that if you missed portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. We have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, read the news wire, check out our swag as well. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on TikTok at Spaced Out Radio. Here we go. We continue on with the UFO report. Little Timmy Seanor is here breaking it all down. We had major news today out of Washington, D.C., where Dr. Stephen Greer led a disclosure conference meeting with former military members and eyewitnesses who have sent their testimony as whistleblowers to AARO and the United States Congress and Senate. Tim, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
One of the things that we wanted to kind of talk about this hour was about the technology. Dr. Stephen Greer made some very loud claims, Tim, that the United States government is in possession of technology right now, along with Russia and China, that could eliminate all pollution on this planet within the next 10 to 20 years and eliminate all hunger on this planet within that same time zone and provide free energy for everybody on the planet. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and he's calling it the extraterrestrial red line. And in that, he bullet points some of his important points on this, calling out the ISG has technology from reverse engineering ET craft that has the capability to be a serious threat to them via quantum entanglement. Secondly, at least 119 ET craft have been downed near or over Earth. Thirdly, an EM scalar weapon can potentially reach beyond our solar system, and theoretically, we have that. Fourth, we have these rogue ISG operations pose a threat to both ET and human civilizations. And then there is an imminent risk that these ISG rogue operations could cross a red line, requiring an ET response to protect innocent life elsewhere and on Earth. And so while this response would be self defense and protective, it risks being deliberately portrayed as a quote alien attack. And prior to protective ET interventions regarding nuclear risks have already been deliberately wrongly portrayed for psychological warfare purposes. And then finally, therefore, it is imperative that the president, Congress, the Pentagon, and other U.S. government agencies obtain immediate command and control over these projects. So, Dave, it sounds like a cry out for taking a deep look into black projects and perhaps exposing them and discussing the 119 ET craft that supposedly have been downed near or over Earth. Can we talk about that?
Well, I think, the one thing I want to mention about the technology first and foremost, Tim, if you don't mind, is the idea that he also mentioned, that's Greer, mentioned that this is going to cost billions of dollars, upwards of $50 billion, that he wants to make this happen. Number one. Number two, he also wants a lot of pardons, presidential pardons for people, and a lot of presidential executive orders in order to make this happen. It sounds, in typical Dr. Greer style, it sounds so grandiose. Yes, it may be the perfect solution, but how do we try and get there? What are the first steps? I don't care 100 steps from now. We're at baby steps with this. And I really don't, do believe that we need to find a path. We don't need a solution. We need a path to the solution. Nobody has really provided a path to the solution. And that's what I find a little bit disturbing about this. I mean, it's easy to say that Lockheed or Battelle or Boeing has that technology, or Raytheon or any of these major defense corporations have the technology hidden right now. That's great and dandy, okay? But how do you get it? How do you get it in the public? These things are so far protected, that Jesus himself would have troubles moving the rocks around this to open up the vault in order to let these out. And this is where I question it. When you start throwing out $50 billion, you're losing a lot of people. When you start throwing out, the president needs like 150 executive orders to make this happen, it's never going to happen. So what do we do to get that ball rolling? I didn't see a lot of that today. Did you?
Well, he does come up with specifics. He presents recommendations. he does offer some steps towards it. But what he is asking for is a lot of assistance, a lot of lawyers to come together and convene and create a think tank on how to move forward. Um, we can get into the law aspect that he's trying to attack by at some point here soon. But you brought up um, part of his recommendation, his number one recommendation, in fact, is that Congress to immediately pass the 50 billion to support research and development and application to zero point and free energy related systems requiring open source disclosure. That feels like a strong request for funding, the same way, we see the other teams asking for funding into protecting our skies. So this doesn't sound like anything out of the ordinary, asking for funding, looking into this. And specifically into free energy, I think is absolutely, that's a win-win if you can get that to happen. But again, you're talking about what are the baby steps towards it. And he says that there should be an amnesty provision for 6 to 12 months for all whistleblowers, executives, government personnel, and corporations, provided full and complete disclosures are made. And then after the amnesty period, individuals and corporations, both private and government, will be vigorously prosecuted, in which terms we're hearing that there's some pressure being applied at this point for whistleblowers and these groups to come forward, because if they don't, they'll be prosecuted. So it's applying pressure for people to come forward as well, potentially. Thirdly, he's asking that Congress should convene open hearings with whistleblowers and evidence, which we're starting to see. Fourthly, Congress to pass legislation to explicitly protect personal safety, pensions, and private assets of whistleblowers. Those are all great steps, like you were saying. But specifically, what we also need to see, and I think he also kind of highlights, um, is that there is kind of this quote unquote call to action that he's requesting from people, meaning that he's activating the public, that if you know anyone or if you're a witness, you should contact them. That you should start writing your members of Congress and to senators, at least, asking the president to support open hearings and disclosure. He also says that there should be a network with your friends and family to support disclosure, meaning talk about it at home and on the level, that you can expand consciousness. Contribute to the Disclosure Project Research and Legal Defense Fund, of course. And if you can assist with the new Energy Research Lab as a scientist, engineer, or source, uh, excuse me, he's asking for people that are interested in the public to get involved, because their goal is to acquire and develop a zero-point energy system to release to open source freely to the public by 2026. It's a big goal, but he says that it already exists. It's just a matter of getting it into the hands of the public. So there's a few steps, meaning that we really need to demand it. The only way to make change is to find the change within yourself, right? I think that's probably what the seed of this expression is. So it's inspirational and motivational for people that want to get on board with this. But Dave, it is still pretty daunting, and you're not going to pry something like free energy potential loose from the grip of the government that they've been hiding it for so long. Um, that's a really tough one. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I understand, Tim, that everything costs money. Okay. But this isn't a telethon. Okay. This is real life disclosure, if that's what we're talking about. And I don't want to dig into my pocket for disclosure. Disclosure shouldn't cost me $29.99 a month. And every month I get a letter from a resident alien stating how glad they are for my donation. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's what it
Yeah.
sounds like it's turning out to be.
And
And there's a lot of
typically, not to interrupt you, but typically, historically, we have seen a lot of the requests for funding from Greer. So
Yes. Like, Stephen, how much are you putting in? We've seen your multi-million dollar mansion and the acreage that goes along with it. Your $3,500 a CE5 lesson on a weekend where you gather 50, 100 people. Well, 3,500 times 100 is a lot of money. It's $350,000 for a weekend. You do that 10 times a year, Tim. It's a lot of money.
he's a doctor.
Money.
He's a
Okay,
doctor.
so look, if Dr. Greer, and I don't know him or his connections that well. Okay, so I'm going to be very careful with what I say. If Dr. Greer has the connections that he says he does, from businesses to CEOs to Congress people to military and everything, the money shouldn't be that hard to find. He shouldn't be Tom DeLonging it and going after people to buy shares in the fake UFO rocket that they're going to build to go into space. Yeah, I went there.
You're so naughty.
It was a good one though. You have to admit that.
Yeah.
You know, but there are so many different angles to the way this is going. Look, I want Greer to succeed. I want Elizondo to succeed. I want David Grush to succeed. I want everybody to succeed as long as we are getting the proper answers, which is disclosure. And as much praise as Dr. Greer deserves for putting this together, because it's hard. It's not an easy task, Timmy. Okay. But for the amount of stuff that he put together, we're not talking disclosure for dollars here. This isn't a telethon. You're playing with 8 billion people's lives. 8 billion. It's not the UFO community. You're playing with every person on the planet, and the one that is born this second, and this second, and this second, and this second, and so on and so forth. You're playing with people's lives, man. And the idea that we are trying to push for funding is great. Okay, where's the GoFundMe? Where's the what do they call those startup things where you could put online and gain a bunch of money? People do it for movies and stuff all the time, and
Yeah,
small
don't use it.
crowdfunding
Yeah.
sites. There's all sorts of crowdfunding sites. All right. Maybe if Dr. Greer was a little bit less about the money and more about getting the message out, people would take him a lot more seriously. But for some reason, it always comes down to billions and it has to funnel through him. That I don't buy. That I don't buy at all.
Yeah, and your chat, as always, has come up with a classic. I love the Jerry Lewis telethon reference. I totally see it. I totally get it. And there's a lot of Jerry Lewis in Dr. Stephen Greer. They're compatible. But all levity aside, I do feel like we need to focus on the goal, which is quote unquote disclosure. And if you're looking for disclosure from the government, this is definitely the way to go about it. And it was pretty clear that the plan is to, via the use of attorney Derek Garcia, use the RICO Act, which is the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, to instill a lawsuit, literally, against the USG, withholding information And there was a very long list of strikes that they were going to hold the USG accountable for. I mean, from racketeering onwards, you name it, theft, grand larceny, murder, all of the really big, scary ones, right? That we know are probably potentially attached to this subject. And I'm smiling only because the list was so long. It was almost laughable, but it's really part of the program that he's putting together. And he's looking for a long list of lawyers in support of the lawyers he currently has that are all working pro bono towards the goal of putting together a case against our own USG for withholding technologies against our knowing and hiding it away, in amongst Raytheon and all of the other independent companies, but knowingly, I think, is the big strike. So that part of it I find very interesting, and I will be following, Dave, because they might get somewhere with that.
That's a lot of accusations. So when you start throwing out the murder card, and you start throwing out a lot of these heavy charges, whether it's racketeering, whether it's anything along those lines. I mean, dude, you are dealing with serious allegations,
and you need
and,
evidence.
and you need evidence, and you need hardcore evidence, not hearsay. Okay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Dr. Greer has a habit of speaking up, talking very big and blustery and tough, but never following through on his accolades and his words of choice. I mean, it's like sometimes it reminds me of a UFC fighter who talks a lot of trash but never steps into the octagon. Every now and again, you got to step into that octagon, and yes, you're going to get hit. No word of a lie, you're going to get hit. But if you're that confident and that good, you should be able to withstand the issue. And I don't know. I mean, I want to believe Dr. Greer. I do. I believe his eyewitness testimonies that were given. I totally believe them. Okay. But can he deliver? The only way to deliver this is by getting and I shouldn't say this with 2 minutes to go, Tim, because it's going to open up a can of worms. Okay. But the problem that the majority of these guys have, whether it's Greer, whether it's the To the Stars Academy, whether it's anybody, who's the first people that they push away?
The
Their
witnesses.
greatest supporters in ufology. Lou Elizondo told me the biggest mistake that the To the Stars Academy made when they came out was that they did not acknowledge or gain the support or want the support of the UFO public. They went against the grain. Dr. Greer goes against the grain. You literally have hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions, Tim, out there who have seen things. And some are more passionate than others. Why would you not want those people on your side? Why would you, instead of begging them to open their wallets, but we're not going to talk to you, we're not going to support you, we're not going on your podcast, we're not going on your YouTube channels, we're not doing anything. Just give us money, money, money. Okay? They've done nothing to support and everything to push away the UFO public. Okay? Now, some people have latched on, other peoples have not. The majority have not. And I don't understand why all of these people want our money, but they don't want to give us what we want, and that's the support back. Tim, great UFO report tonight. Thank you so much, my man. You do a great job for us each and every time you are on, and it's so good to have be back on the air with you, my man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, all of you and our guest tonight, Dick Larson, for shooting on up and talking Maitreya and a little bit of aliens, because that's what we love to do around here. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thanks to everybody listening in at work, at home, in your cars, wherever you may be. Thank you to everyone in our chat rooms tonight. YouTube, Twitch, LGAB, Facebook, Spreaker, LinkedIn, the Space Travelers Club, and on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Remember, this show is copyright by Spaced Out Radio and SOR Media Ventures Limited. Thank you so much for choosing to share your evening with us, because together, my friends,
we're watching.
We own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Yes, the Woo train has docked for the night. But soon, my friends, we shall ride again. Your seats are always available. Your tickets never expire. And if you want to bring a friend, just yell, Timmy. Good night.